Hi, I'm Narwhal Prime, and today I'll be talking over a run I did for Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. So first I'd like to talk about how this game normally works. There are at least two people playing this game. One is the diffuser, who can only see the bomb and control where to look and what to click on. And the other players are the experts. They have access to the manual, which is the PDF provided by the devs that give you rules on how to defuse each of the modules. So what this game turns out is a communication exercise where the diffuser must tell the experts what's on the bomb, the experts have to parse that information and tell the diffuser how to defuse. And if there are any mistakes in between, well, you get strikes, and if you get enough strikes, the bomb blows up. Otherwise, you are victorious. Now, from a speedrunning perspective, it is highly recommended to memorize the manual, therefore eliminating the need for any communication that can slow things down or any misunderstandings. Of course, the hard part would be memorizing each of the, probably like a dozen or so modules. As the recording goes on, I'll be talking about each of the modules and how I approach them. And you might hear me flipping through this manual I have here, just in case I miss some details. So the categories for this game, as these according to speedrun.com, there is the any percent and the extreme percent. Any percent is where the player must solve all the bombs in one go, in order. And extreme percent is only up to the last bomb of the second to last chapter, the 6.4 I am hardcore bomb. Now, given that extreme percent is a subset of any percent, I do plan to run extreme percent. And as an added incentive, if people wish to see me do more bombs, I can add in any percent if the incentive is met. Normally I do any percent, which is what you'll see me do in this run here, just in case things go as planned. So I'd like to start off with describing what I'm doing here. These are the beginning bombs. They basically introduce you to new modules as you progress. These are pretty lenient for the most part. They allow you 3 strikes before the bomb blows up. So you can do 2 mistakes, indicated by the little X's above the timer. Let's just go through the modules in order here. So we've already seen the horizontal wires, or I like to call them the simple wires. The way this works is there are different sets of rules depending on the number of wires there are. And there's a sequential series of steps you must follow to determine which wire to cut. For example, if there are 3 wires, then you go, okay, if there are no red wires, cut the second wire. Otherwise, if the last wire is white, cut the last wire, etc. Pretty straightforward. Makes for a good introduction to the bomb. And, well, wires are associated with diffusing bombs anyway. How I approach this one, for its simplicity, this is actually, it does take some time getting used to, especially if you're trying to do this very quickly. In my case, I haven't really memorized the steps. Like, I don't concretely think of each of the steps, but rather just look for key features like, do I see red wires, or do I see one yellow with multiple white wires? And if I see those, I still have to think about what steps take priority. So it's kind of like I don't memorize the steps in order, because somehow that's just a little slower. But as with all these modules I'll be describing here, everyone's memorization techniques would vary. I'm not too aware of how other runners think about it usually. They don't usually say their techniques as they run. But as I've cut out my original audio when I was running this, but I like to spew out my mnemonics while I am doing the bomb. So hopefully when people see me run this, they'll get a glimpse of what goes on through my mind. Anyways, so that's the wires. So far with these beginning bombs, you may have seen me get intentional strikes, or a lot of strikes at once. This is usually due to the button module, the big round thing with a random word and a random color. So to diffuse that module, the time at which you defuse it, or you must press the button and then release it. When you release it depends on the existence of a certain digit in the countdown timer. But by getting more strikes, the countdown timer actually goes faster than normal. So you can save a few seconds if you want to get a desired digit. Also, there may be a few edge cases where you actually must press immediately release the button without waiting for a colored strip. Getting those patterns is RNG, and that's what introduces a lot of variance into running this game. You can get there's a bomb with 2 buttons, 2 series of wires, and 2 button symbols, which I'll go over later. But sometimes you may get 2 buttons. They both say detonate on them, and there's a bunch of batteries on the bomb. That's a pattern in which you must click the buttons immediately. So that's a good time saver if you can get that. Yeah, the button is actually fairly straightforward. There's just a few gotchas. Pretty rare edge cases where it's there's a rule that says, if you have more than 2 batteries on a bomb and there's a certain label on the bomb that's lit up, you must immediately release that button. That almost always happens unless you get a blue abort button. So in very rare cases, you might just forget about it and say, oh, well, that just happened. But for the most part, the button is pretty reliable. Let's see, real quick, where are we in this recording right now? So the first 2 chapters are basically introducing new kinds of modules at you. Chapter 3 is where it gets a little trickier. One of the bombs actually introduces the idea where you get 1 strike and that's it, you blow up. So those are what I call the hardcore bombs. Actually, they're called that in game as well. Yeah. Oh, actually, yeah. Chapter 3, which is going on right now, is I'm not entirely sure why, but they introduce what they describe as modules that encode information. I guess it's a little vague, but in the manual they refer to the password module, the Morse code module. Not sure if there's a third one. Anyway, I haven't really paid attention to exactly what modules are in which bombs. There are some bombs where there's guaranteed to be a certain subset of modules. Like 2.2, which you might have seen earlier, was double your money. That's always, again, 2 buttons, 2 wires, 2 sets of symbols. There'll be several of those throughout the game. So we're coming up to 3.6, which is no room for error. This is the example of the hardcore bomb I demonstrated. Was there anything earlier? Not really, to be honest. Anyway, I'll keep talking about the modules as they go along. So the one with the 4 strange-looking symbols, that's the keypads. So there are several lists of symbols. The game will select one at random and choose 4 of the 7 symbols in that list to appear. The list of symbols has the symbols ordered. They put them in a certain order. You have to memorize those and press those buttons in the order in which they appear in the list. And to make matters a little more complicated, some of the symbols are shared among lists. So you have to find the list which contains all those symbols. This one was a pretty fun one to memorize. Fun fact, they're not made up entirely. I believe they are part of the valid Unicode set, though they are pretty strange for the most part. There's the copyright symbol and the paragraph symbol, which are pretty standard. You got some other symbols from possibly other languages. This one I can see there's a 6 paragraph, the X, and I think some of the community likes to call that the kitty, which I wholeheartedly agree. Although it seems in my mnemonics I tend to call it the alien as well, because I've also heard that. Both are acceptable for me. This bomb has a lot of modules. Yeah, so this one's the 8-minute one. It's the first bomb in the series to have I guess more modules than usual. 7 of them, 8 of them. Yeah. Yeah, let's continue. Actually, yeah. So the way I do the symbols, literally just come up with 6 stories, or like phrases that encompass each of those symbols. That's yeah. They sound pretty much nonsense when I say them out loud, but again, everyone memorizes things differently. You gotta go fast. Sometimes it doesn't always make sense. Alright. Before I go on, so we're going to chapter 4 in this run. This is the introduction of the needy modules. So far you can see these modules can be really done in any order, and after you solve them, there's no need to go back to them. The idea of needy is there's a little countdown timer on the top, like this one. This is known as the capacitor. It counts down from 45. If the timer should run out, you instant strike. The way the capacitor works is you have to press the lever and the meter would go down and the timer would increase up to max 45 seconds. And then when you release it again and tend to other modules, well, it counts down again. Now, since this is a speed run, well, sometimes you don't have to worry about the needy modules. Though in some cases, if you are going a bit slow, you do have to tend to them, as you'll see in the later bombs. But it makes things more exciting. So next one on the list is, Simon Says. Alright, so that's the one with the 4 colored squares. Pretty much like a Simon Says game from childhood. As you can probably tell, you can't just click on the squares that light up. Actually, depending on whether there's a vowel in a serial number and how many strikes you've gotten so far, you'd actually have to change up your pattern. For example, like if you have 1 strike and your serial number has a vowel, then if you see red, you must press yellow instead. If you see blue, you must press green, and stuff like that. There are not that many rules to memorize. And honestly, for the most part, if you're doing hardcore bombs, you only have 1 strike to work with. So you're most likely dealing with 2 patterns. This is safety, though. It's good to know the other patterns. Especially since if you're taking advantage of the strikes to make your timer go faster. Actually, yeah, it is pretty recommended. This needy module, this is the first time we see the knob needy in 4.3. There are 8 different types of patterns those little green LEDs can show up in. And to each of the 2 correspond to one of the directions of the knob. And that little knob has a little up indicator. And that can rotate, as you can see. So in a stressful environment, or, yeah, hilariously stressful environment, that could be set to the incorrect position, and when the timer goes off, well, gotta start over. Let's see. But yeah, again, the Simon Says is pretty straightforward. So in the case of no strikes, if there's a vowel, well, swap red and blue. If there's no vowel, the green is always green, but the other 3 cycle clockwise. I suppose if you hear me speedrun this, I'll say like Simon Says, vowel, I have to swap, or no vowel, I have to cycle. That's how I usually do it. This bomb had several needies on it, but you don't have to worry about it. You can 1-cycle it if you get fast modules. We're going into chapter 5. Finally, all these needy bombs that have come up, they've all been 1-strike bombs. So finally we get a little breaker as we go into 5.1 and have 3 strikes again. So these are all the wire-based modules. It's a little bit of leeway. Let's see. Since we're on wires right now, so I like to talk about the vertical wires. So horizontal wires are the simple wires. Vertical are complicated. It's actually complicated for both the diffuser and the expert because there's a lot of information going on, and it's not very, intuitive on the manual either. It's a Venn diagram with 4 circles, and depending on details like the colors of the wires, how many batteries there are, and if you have a parallel port, Oh, and if you have an even serial number. Oh, there's a whole lot of stuff, actually. Anyways, there's a Venn diagram that tells you which wires you can cut, depending on those conditions. Guess that one is definitely a little tricky. Probably best not to memorize it as a Venn diagram. Yeah, so actually I grouped up the situations in which you can cut the wires, like, oh, if they have batteries, cut this, this, and this. Basically, you transform that data into something that's more manageable to the human brain. Real quick, this bomb is another one of those that has a set of has a fixed set of modules. The password, Simon says, and the maze. Again, I'll get to those eventually. Here, I'm a little worried about missing a cycle, so I do tend to the computer hacking needy module. If it says vent gas, yes. If it says detonate, no. Pretty straightforward. Although good to know is these needy modules will, well, actually just the knob and the computer hacking needy modules, they'll start beeping if they're about to run out of time. However, it might be a bit late for the computer hacking one because there's a little bit of delay when you press the button and when the module kind of registers you've pressed it. Even though you've pressed it before 0 happens, well, too late. Yeah, I like to talk about this one actually. This is the second hardest module for me to memorize. This is called Who's on First. It's based on a famous sketch by Abbott and Costello where they confuse words in a hilarious way. As you can see, a lot of these labels have similar, well, they look kind of similar. They sound similar too, like you and the letter U, you, your, those kind of words. This is a two-part exercise where you have a word in display on top, and it corresponds to one of the 6 positions on the bottom. You look at a label in that position. There are 28 possible different labels, therefore 28 different possible lists, which you have to follow. You basically have to press the first word among those 6 that appears in that list. Yeah, I guess I'll start talking about how I approach that one. What's good to know, especially for Who's on First and the memory-based module, the one with the 4 numbers, there's a little bit of delay between when you press the button and when the next stage of that module becomes visible. That allows you to parallelize your work a lot. You can be doing one module and then, oh, okay, I have the Who's on First. Okay, I'll just click the right answer real quick and then continue on with what I was doing in the other module. This also goes in hand with the button here because sometimes you have to wait for the correct digit. The only relevant digits for the button are 4, 5, and 1. So in a 5-minute bomb, you can start off doing something like the Who's on First or the memory module and say, oh, okay, 4 minutes, 51 seconds is almost up. I should go to the button, assuming you don't have to click and immediately release it. So that's, if you get the timing down, is the usual way of approaching those bombs. Yeah, at this point, all the modules have been seen by the time you get to Chapter 5, so they're just throwing some harder combinations at you. So far, except for that wires one, they've all been hardcore. 5.6 is the only one, is the only other one that doesn't. It's 3 strikes and features one of each of the non-needy modules. So that's 11 modules all on the same bomb. Who's on First has been a pretty fun one to memorize. In some ways frustrating, but I guess that's part of the fun of running this game, is you eventually develop all these techniques, and there's so many different ways you can memorize these things. But once you feel it, once you've accomplished that, it feels pretty good. So let's see, there's actually, I didn't realize this. There's also only 28 labels, possible labels for the display. That's separate from the labels on the buttons. the display tells you which button to press again, or rather, which button to look at first. That's just basically memorizing 6 lists, so nothing too fancy. The fancy part is memorizing the 28 lists, each corresponding to the labels. So this is actually I borrowed a technique from a Reddit thread discussion on this game. You take each of the 28 labels and you pair each of them with a letter in the alphabet, and for the remaining 2, I pair them with exclamation mark and question mark. And that compacts the lists very well. You can make some sort of mnemonics or words from these jumbles of letters. Well, you have to keep them in order, so I wouldn't say jumble. For example, let's see if I can find one. So, yeah. So for the label U, Y-O-U, that list is sure, you are 2 words, your possessive, your contraction, next, the letters you are, hold, what, and the word you. As you can see, I had to clarify which you I meant, which actually makes observing people doing this module pretty fun. And then you do it yourself, and it's pretty frustrating. So in my mind, those letters translate to, where was I? Sorry, was I reading the wrong list? You know what? That was not for the word. No, actually that was for you. Let's see where we are now. Okay. Just real quick. Actually, not really much to say here. These are hardcore bombs, more complicated modules, pretty much random at this point. Anyways, so where was I? Yeah, so for that list, I just rattled off. They translate to letters S, C, where was I? Oh yeah, S, C, Z, E, X, A, V, H, question mark. Huh. Oh yeah. It's funny when you see the list and you've been doing these mnemonics in your head all this time that you kind of forgot what the original list was like. Anyways, so I take those letters, and in this case I turn them into a sort of acronym. So SCZEXA. So that becomes like Santa Claus zips every Xmas, all very happy. That's just one of my examples. So you might hear me say Santa Claus, and my friend who hears me speedrun this game is like, why do you keep mentioning Santa Claus? Well, it's because I've seen the label U. Yeah, some lists are shorter, mainly because you've hit the word in the list that was also the label associated with that list. So you can just not memorize the whole list. Oh, yes, I remember this one. Okay, so going back to the run here, I actually forgot there were 2 needy modules I had to tend to on the other side. So with the original... Oh, no. Did we already pass that bomb? Probably. This was real quick, this is the run where I had my PB as of this recording, where I only exploded once. Quick note is, it's pretty natural to explode like 4 or 5 times, just mainly due to human error, assuming you can memorize things fairly consistently. Things can happen. Even in the worst possible case where you say like, I think in my case, I would blow up like 12 times. That's about a loss of 8 minutes, which I've accounted for in my estimates. The amount of time you lose can vary, obviously, depending on when you blow up in the bomb. I want to say, if you blow up like right before the lights even turn on in the room, I'd say like 20 seconds lost. And if you're already like almost done, like at the last step, probably anywhere 1.5 minutes. Yeah, 1.5 minutes sounds about right. So yeah, it is fairly significant of a time loss when exploding, but exploding a few times is honestly pretty expected. There are a lot of different modules and a lot of bombs, so there's really no shame. Of course, you would like to get as perfect as possible, but in a marathon run, it is to be expected. Honestly, 4 or 5 times is a pretty good amount, especially if they all happen near the beginning. Let's see. So coming up after this bomb is the I Am Hardcore bomb. Personally, I find this the best one to train on after you've memorized all the modules. It's guaranteed to be one needy module, and the rest, the bomb is filled up with all the other modules that are not needy. It's actually a famous video on YouTube. The first time I heard about this game was from that video where I believe his name was Lieutenant Hummus. He solved this bomb with his friends on stream, and they get a less than 1 second on the timer remaining. And it was pretty adrenaline rushing, even just watching it. And that's what inspired me to pick up this game. Played it with friends a few times. We haven't been able to find the time to play consistently. That's also what inspired me to run this game. After seeing some solo runs of it, I realized there's a lot of sort of mental control you need to recall a lot of different sort of random information and do it in a kind of intense setting where, make one mistake, gotta start over. Anyways, was done talking about who's on first. Yeah, so one of the earliest modules I didn't mention yet. So the memory one, this is one my mouse is on right now in the recording. So there are 5 stages to this bomb, and it's important to note, there are instructions on each stage as to what button to press. But each stage after the first may rely on what position button and what label button of the button you've pressed previously. For example, if I'm on stage 3 and, the display is 2, press the button with the same label you pressed in stage 1. So if you hear me spew out a bunch of numbers at once, like 2 4 1 4 3 2, it's basically me rattling off the positions and numbers or labels that I've pressed. Real quick, we are going into the exotic bombs that are not included as part of the extreme percent. Pretty much these bombs are just copies of the same module, except for the last one. These actually make a pretty good practice if you're just starting off. They've got the maze, the wire sequence, and complicated wires, and the passwords. So, good practice. Just gotta do them over and over, fail them over and over. That's honestly the best way to practice speedrunning this game, is you get really comfortable with one module and move on to the next. You might have noticed the Morse code one, the one with the blinking orange light and the little megahertz symbol. Pretty straightforward. Just gotta memorize Morse. And there's a list of words, and each is associated with a certain frequency. Just go to that frequency, done. Again, accounting for the RNG in this game, there are a couple words that have unique letters, like vector is the only one with V, boxes is the only one with X. You see those, you think, you know which frequency to do. And other times you see I, C, K, and say, there's several different words with this, so you just gotta wait, do a different module, come back. And you also get to learn Morse if you do this one. So I covered complicated wires, which is this module anyway. So we're going into mazes. This would be the second hardest module I've memorized. So I've said who's on first is most difficult, maze is second. There's a couple others that are pretty interesting. So the way mazes works is there's 9 different mazes, and how you can tell which maze you're on is by the green circles, what positions they're in. I actually use those positions to sort of base my image for that maze on. So for example, the two mazes you saw on the other side just now, that's the only maze in which there are circles on the top row and bottom row. So I call that a polar expedition, or just polar, because opposite sides. And the path I trace for the maze, and obviously the walls are all invisible on the bomb. But if you see in the manual, like I just trace out shapes, and I sort of like think of it like people on a polar expedition. It's really hard to justify my imagery, and honestly, it is really best for the runner themselves to come up with their own mnemonics. It's also more interesting that way, so you can see like how people associate these different things. Yeah, I give names to the mazes. So, Polar Express, Big L, Elephant, Conversation, Mustache, Sidewinder. Yeah, I could go on all day about how I came up with these, but it's honestly more interesting to hear others and like the different imageries people have. This module is called Wire Sequences, and it features different colored wires, and whether they connect to A, B, or C is important, as well as how many wires of that color you've cut. We got a list, 3 lists for red, blue, and black wires. So they got things like, oh, if you're on the first black wire, you must always cut it, no matter what label it's connected to. Or, oh, if it's the fourth blue wire you've seen, only cut it if it's connected to A. And by fourth or third, it's going down from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. So if the wires start crisscrossing, you just gotta be a little careful. I guess I don't really have a concrete way I memorize this. I suppose it's just getting familiar with the patterns and also knowing which positions you are in. So this is another bomb module in which I'll spew out a bunch of numbers like 3, 1, 2. Like, oh, I've got 3 wires, 3 red wires, 1 blue wire, 2 black wires, that kind of deal. And in the manual I'm seeing right here, there's like letters that, I guess, not exactly words, but they're still patterns. It's really hard to describe after doing this for quite a while. I suppose like there's a part where it goes like AC, BC, BC. I think, okay, air conditioning, BC times. But honestly, just thinking of it as more abstract patterns. Like I started off with those mnemonics, but eventually they became more abstract patterns, is what I'm saying. Therefore, it's hard to explain. Yeah, and the last module to explain, well, you're seeing it here. This is the passwords. There are, 35 different words that could appear, and only exactly one of them can be formed from the letters in that particular module. There are a couple of techniques for going through this. For example, if you look at the list, every word that begins with a T must immediately be followed by an H. So if I say T and then I look at the second letter, no H, continue. And I memorize a list of words that only begin with whose first letter is the only word in that list that begins with its first letter. So that would be below, could, every, great, house, never, other, right. And every time I see that, it makes narrowing down the words a bit easier. Yeah. Honestly, this one's just memorizing lists. There might be a, more optimal way. Probably like you can single out the third letters or fourth letters, but honestly, it's just easier to go left to right. It's more intuitive, I suppose. Anyway, coming up to the last bomb, blinking lights, 3 Morse, 3 Simon Says. Anyways, yeah, guess I've explained all the modules. I guess what keeps me running this game, it's definitely a unique one. I'm sure I think some people have heard of it probably through the internet, and like, oh, this is like this game based on this old movie trope, and it can be a great communication exercise, team building rather. I've seen some videos on YouTube, just even though people are exploding left and right, they eventually get the bomb, and it's an accomplishment. So one might think, oh, after memorizing the manual, well, you can no longer play as a diffuser who needs experts, right? But the Steam Workshop is open for this game, so people can submit their own custom modules and challenges. So theoretically, this game can keep producing more and more content, and one can never really memorize that all. So, yeah, it's also been a pretty fun challenge, being able to juggle between different modules while keeping your cool. I guess that's sort of my game, actually. I haven't been really speedrunning the sort of like movement-based or frame-perfect ones. This one, while those games are pretty fun to watch, this one is quite pure in its own right. The fact that it's really just mostly what's going on in your mind, sort of like organizing your thoughts under time pressure or pressure over mistakes. It's a pretty intense experience. That's a good amount of time too. Yeah, anyways, that's been Keep Talking Nobody Explodes, and I hope you enjoyed this commentary. And thank you so much. So long.